I know the protagonist of this story, Van J. He is inside the goblin's lair, and let me tell you, he is so in control that he is literally cutting down countless goblins without even moving from his spot. The other goblins in the area begin to cower upon seeing how this guy brutally takes down everything in his path without caring about who dares to face him. One of the terrified goblins tries to hit him with an annoying little arrow, but is quickly smashed by Van John's club, which seems to move on its own. Now the goblins are even more scared and retreat apprehensively. However, to the misfortune of these poor creatures, they will not escape unscathed. Van Joe then transforms his club into a literally enchanted gun, ready to incinerate every goblin in sight. Sure, having all this power is cool and all, but let's take a moment to dive into Van Joe's origin story and understand how he got to this point. Since he was 4 years old, practically a child, Van Joe was exceptional at recognizing languages. He was so skilled at it that his parents began to worry because he understood countless languages. His proud grandfather always bragged about his grandson, claiming that a child destined to fulfill the long-cherished family wish had been born, to claim the power of Babel for them. Of course, Vanen's parents never believed these stories, which always left the old man furious. You see, according to family tradition, a long time ago, in a chaotic world, the great ancestors of the Van family possessed the ability to enable everyone to communicate. With this power, they united people of all species and built a tower that would never collapse. This tower was called the Tower of Babel. Van Johan's interest was piqued as soon as he heard about this tower, not because he was fascinated by his ancestors' history, but because he was a greedy boy who wanted to take advantage of it. For this reason, he begged his grandfather to reveal where the tower was. Unfortunately for him, the grandfather did not know the exact location. However, the old man filled his grandson with hope, saying that once they found the tower, his family would regain all its power and glory. From that moment, Van Johan always hoped that his extraordinary linguistic talent could help him restore the family's prestige, as he had heard in the stories. Surprisingly, his abilities exceeded all expectations. Over time, he grew into a young man. One day, he was anxiously waiting to see if he had been accepted into university. As he refreshed the screen window to check the results, a strange digital window appeared before him. The strangest thing about this window was that everything written on it was in some kind of foreign language. He tried to read it, and the system window revealed it was a congratulatory note from the best academy in an alternative dimension, congratulating him for passing the document screening. Of course, Van John was completely baffled because he had no idea how he could read that or what all that nonsense meant. As he kept reading, the system revealed that he had been summoned to the location for a practical evaluation and that, if approved, he would become a future student. The note indicated that he would be transported there in 10 seconds. The countdown began, and our distracted fool had no idea what was happening. At that exact moment, he also received the university acceptance letter stating that he had been admitted. Of course, he already knew he would be accepted, but he was still nervous. When the countdown ended, a blue light enveloped him, and he disappeared before his mother could see him. She was left clueless about where he had gone. Suddenly, he found himself falling into a dark tunnel, and another system appeared, announcing that a special practical evaluation for candidates from lower dimensions had begun. Van Joe was utterly confused, wondering if he had entered some kind of game. Meanwhile, the system indicated that he had to defeat a blind goblin and destroy the core. But die was the only thing he felt he could do. He shouted in frustration for being dragged into a mess he had never signed up for, wanting to know what the hell that practical evaluation meant and all that nonsense about the special exam. Just then, there was the ominous sound of footsteps. Van Johan literally began sweating bullets when he saw those disgusting and ugly creatures with clubs in their hands. It seemed these creatures couldn't see him but could clearly hear him. The two goblins spoke in their own language, but surprisingly, our boy could understand them perfectly. It was not at all encouraging to hear them call him prey. He began to piece together what the system notification had said about the practical evaluation, blind goblins, and the dungeon core. He thought he really needed to defeat these creatures to get out of there because all of this seemed straight out of a game or a novel. The goblins tried to detect him while Johan literally cried over his bad luck, wondering how he was expected to defeat these creatures when he had never even killed a rat in his life, let alone something dangerous. One of the goblins, finally, he swings his club, landing just a few centimeters from John's groin, almost hitting him right between the legs. It is literally 1 centimeter away from him being castrated. The goblin swings the club again, but this time John dodges the blow, trying to stay calm to avoid drawing more attention. However, it seems his presence has already been completely exposed to these relentless goblins who try to crush him once more. John jumps at the right moment, escaping by a hair. The 2 goblins then begin talking about the exact location of the sound, which makes John realize that although these creatures are blind, they are extremely sensitive to sounds and movements. It seems they hunt by surrounding their prey while communicating with each other. John is certain that no matter how much he hides, he will eventually be caught. Then he finally comes up with a clever idea. He throws a small rock in another direction. The monsters quickly run toward the sound without hesitation, but all they find are 2 small rocks. At that moment, John takes advantage of the distraction and strikes one of the goblins with a giant rock. Confused, the 2 goblins begin attacking each other, thinking they are fighting the enemy. They hit each other until the end, eventually both falling unconscious after hitting their heads. John nearly soils his pants at the sight of this brutal disaster. While gasping profusely, he notices the clubs used by the creatures are nearby. He picks one up, apologizes to the 2 green bastards for what he is about to do, and finally strikes them on the head to ensure they are truly out of combat. As soon as the goblins are dead, a bright light surrounds John, and a system notification appears, congratulating him on his first successful dungeon hunt. As a reward, he is granted the power of higher dimensions. A strange enchantment begins to swirl around his hand, and the system reveals that the power of the Babylonian code has been unlocked. The system explains that this power will manifest through ideograms, a language familiar to the user. If he doesn't know the ideograms, the system clarifies that they are characters that convey meaning through their form, representing concepts or things. The system notification indicates that Chinese characters have been registered. Unlike phonetic characters that represent sounds, these characters convey meaning directly. From the 2 goblins, the common concepts of demon and life were extracted, along with other concepts too complex or insignificant for the user's current level. This surprises John even more because, as he understands, his ability is not merely linguistic. He can literally extract concepts from things. The system then informs him that he is about to absorb 0.2 of demon, and that demons are inherently a concept humans cannot possess. It is recommended to store or separate this in the Babylonian code and apply it to other objects. John decides to try absorbing another concept instead. He grabs the floating symbol in the air and places it on his chest. The system quickly reveals that he absorbed 0.4 of life, increasing his life to 10.4 and improving his capabilities and potential. Next, he also absorbs 0.2 of flesh, raising his fleshiness to 10.2 and making his body healthier. As he moves his fingers, he notices not only that he feels better overall, but also that his grip strength, leg strength, and everything else have significantly improved. Essentially, he had absorbed the abilities of the 2 goblins, and once their powers were transferred to him, their bodies disappeared. All that remained were 2 clubs. If applying concepts worked with him, John assumes it should also work with objects. So he takes one of the concepts and applies it to one of the clubs. This is how all the blind goblins in the dungeon end up dead. Finally, he destroys a strange orb known as the Dungeon Core, and the system window congratulates him on having overcome the practical trial of the lower dimension special exam. John lets out a huge sigh of relief, wondering if this means he can finally go home. But to his dismay, the system informs him that he will be transported to the residence. The place he is sent to is not his home, but a world he had never seen before, a place called the Union Academy. Upon landing on the ground, another system window congratulates him on passing the practical exam and becoming a provisional student. The system then informs him that he must correctly wear the assigned uniform and attend the interview, ensuring he wears the Union Academy uniform with pride. Of course, John is once again cursing his bad luck. After all, he had finally been accepted into one of the universities in his country. Now he has to go back to wearing a school uniform. Not that he has any options. Frustrated, he quickly puts on the uniform and strides off, ready to give these people a piece of his mind. At the very least, he is thinking of demanding compensation for the transportation chaos they put him through. But all his frustration disappears when he sees an absolute beauty wearing glasses sitting at the reception desk. John hesitates to approach, wondering if she could be a green-skinned alien like the goblins he just fought. But alien or not, she is undeniably stunning. As soon as the lady notices him, she greets John as if she had been expecting him. She introduces herself as a magical combat professor at Union Academy and expresses her joy at seeing him there in the first place. She congratulates him for passing the practical exam and then asks if he knows just how extraordinary his test results were because he caught the attention of the entire academy. Of course, Van and Ban have no idea what she's talking about. Meanwhile, the teacher continues explaining that he is the first student in 500 years to create a new artifact during the evaluation. But our boy isn't exactly thrilled with all these compliments. After all, he was dragged there without knowing anything and almost died in the process. The teacher, however, is beaming, overjoyed beyond measure. She explains that his case is exceptional, far beyond what was expected from the special exam. Meanwhile, Ban is mentally disconnected, wondering when he'll finally have the chance to leave this academy. But then, his eyes fix on something strange outside, a huge pillar. He asks the teacher, curious about the name of that pillar. She explains that the pillar is the very reason the Union Academy was created. The academy exists to educate the most talented students from all dimensions and help them reach the top of the tower. This, she says, is the ultimate aspiration of the Union Academy and the shared hope of all dimensions, to conquer the Dungeon of Dungeons, the origin of all mysteries and dangers of this world known as the Tower of Babel. This revelation hits Ban like a truck. The Tower of Babel. Everything his grandfather used to talk about, the stories he heard growing up, it's all right there in front of him. Although Ban is enchanted by the revelation, there's one thing he still doesn't fully understand. They called it the Dungeon of Dungeons. Does this mean strange monsters have taken over the tower? But whatever the case, a smile forms on his face because he realizes that the glory of his family and ancestors will be revived once again. At that moment, he decides to enroll in the Union Academy. Thanks to the teacher's special treatment, he is temporarily sent back home. After gathering his entire family and explaining everything that happened, he prepares to enroll with renewed determination. We fast forward to his return inside the lower dungeon of the Union Academy. In the HW Goob cave, we find Van Jo again, this time completely wiping the poor goblins from existence, wielding his powerful enchanted weapon with ease. The results of his training and his new powers are evident. The legend of his family begins anew, and Vanan has barely started. Now that we know how Vanan got to this point, it's time to dive deeper into his abilities. You see, in the beginning, he thought his power was limited to language. But after encountering several goblins, he began to understand concepts like demon, life, flesh, murder, and even shot. All of this changed radically with the Babylonian Code, an ability that allows him to absorb, verbalize, and manipulate the very concepts of all objects around him. Every time he defeats an enemy, Ban can acquire concepts he manages to recognize. The more concepts he acquires, the stronger he will become. For example, in his first dungeon, the Cave of the Blind Goblin, he took several concepts from the goblins and infused a demon into a club, strengthening it until it transformed into a weapon. That club is now imbued with a frightening energy and has become the first artifact created by Ban. Under his command, the club reveals its true form, transforming and acting autonomously as a weapon. He hugs his new little friend so tightly that it makes it blush. All thanks to this little one who helped our boy achieve incredible results in the evaluation. Next, he decides to organize all the concepts he possesses. It's then that he notices something among the concepts he took from the monsters, a completely new concept called soul. At that moment, his little club begins to beg him to share that concept. Our boy cheerfully agrees, not only with the concept of soul, but also adds life, ghosts, and spirits. Quickly, he invokes the concepts and incorporates them into the club. The combined concepts create a perfect harmony, provoking a transformation in the artifact. The concepts of ghost and beast automatically merge, giving rise to an impressive synergy far beyond his current potential. Thanks to the transcendental fusion, the Phantom Beast 10 was completed, and a snake known as the Phantom Beast appears before him. Honestly, I have no idea how his powers work exactly, but I'll pretend I do. As fierce as this beast seems, it is just a small snake that emerged from the combination of the concepts of ghost and beast, gives life to this new creature known as the Ghost Beast. Van extends his hand to touch it, but when he sees the reptilian face of the snake, he hesitates. The snake seems to notice and starts to look a little sad. Finally, Van gathers his courage and pets the snake's head. The little one quickly coils around the boy's hand, and Van even gives it a name. Before returning, they decide to check the growth stats of what they've experienced so far. Life seems to be a concept similar to a level in a game, while flesh represents physical stats. Still puzzled about why the stat of his soul is so high, he starts to wonder if abilities like the all-seeing poles and the all-hearing ears are somehow related to his linguistic abilities. In any case, he decides it's time to go back. Once he presses the yes button, he starts teleporting to the admission ceremony at the Union Academy. As soon as we arrive at the Union Academy auditorium for the entrance ceremonies, the entire place is packed with new students. Amid all this commotion, our boy appears, drawing everyone's attention with his unexpected entrance. He is a bit surprised by the number of people around him, but quickly uses his all-seeing eyes. These special eyes allow him to read everything based on his competence, enabling him to understand the aura and spirit of the environment more deeply. As he thought, unlike him, who entered through a special admission from a lower dimension, the regular students who arrived through the normal process seem really strong, even at first glance. While scanning the crowd to find his seat, a giant ugly bastard suddenly appears in front of him. He asks if he's from the lower dimension and warns our boy not to wander around and to stay out of his sight. Our boy gestures for him to leave him alone and starts walking on his own to avoid any confusion. It's clear that those who entered through the ordinary process have a high opinion of themselves and look down on him for being from a lower dimension. Even here, those with power and strength despise those beneath them, which isn't very different from his home planet, Earth. He wonders if this attitude is the same everywhere in the world where these people live. Suddenly, someone calls him by name and tells him to sit there. As he approaches, he notices that there are only 4 seats occupied by 3 people. He wonders if that's where the specially admitted lower dimension students are supposed to sit. All of this feels like racism to him. When he uses his visual abilities to assess the capabilities of these people, what he sees leaves him completely perplexed. Not only are they powerful, but they have enough strength to easily overpower the regular students. The blonde boy sitting in the first seat already knows our boy. It's the handsome Van he met in the dormitory before the admission ceremony. Although their first encounter was a bit unusual, when Van first entered the dormitory, a blonde pointed a sword at him. But before things escalated, Van quickly remembered that they are both first-year students, meaning they are roommates. The blonde apologizes for his previous behavior, admitting that he had just finished a practical evaluation and was therefore on edge. He asks if Van is okay, but judging by Van's sweaty expression, It's clear that he doesn't feel very well. However, Van is more captivated by how this blonde literally looks like a prince from a fairy tale, despite having quite a temper, considering that the blonde apologized first. Maybe he isn't so bad after all. They sit together and talk about their experiences. When Van shares his story about fighting blind goblins, the blonde can't help but mock him, saying that even a rookie recruit with basic training could easily defeat a goblin. Naturally, this irritates Van, who mutters to himself about how this guy is 100% clueless. Speaking of fights, Van suddenly remembers that he needs to wash his uniform. Without thinking much, he starts taking off his shirt. As soon as his abs appear, the blonde turns completely red with embarrassment at seeing such a well-defined male body. When Van isn't looking, the blonde quickly averts his gaze to avoid any uncomfortable eye contact, which slightly startles Van. At present, the situation remains full of tension. But then Van greets the other two girls sitting in the seats nearby. One of them has pink hair and looks absolutely stunning, with toned features and long hair that perfectly complements her feline eyes. Then there's the white-haired girl, whose first impression is anything but pleasant. In fact, Van finds her a bit scary because her deep black eyes are so intimidating that he has to look away. As he does so, the sinister white-haired woman fixes her gaze on the white snake coiled around his hand and asks about it. Van introduces his little friend as Ive, and the three are immediately enchanted by the adorable creature. Next, the blonde comments curiously that this snake used to look like a staff and finds it interesting how it transformed so drastically in just a few days. The white-haired girl, who initially seemed intimidating, turns out to be quite friendly. She introduces herself as Darren, the daughter of a martial artist. Then she asks for Van's name, and he quickly introduces himself, following up with a curious question about whether she can fire energy blasts using martial arts. Naturally, the other three laugh at his ridiculous comment, but Darren hints that his interpretation isn't entirely wrong, which intrigues Van even more. The pink-haired woman introduces herself as Ruxo, and the blonde finally shares his name. Light suddenly sees Van and Professor Yumina in the middle of the crowd. Light asks Van if he also had an appointment with her. At that moment, a light begins to shine above their heads. When they look up, they notice that the ceiling of the auditorium is opening. A thunderous voice fills the space so loud that it feels like their heads are going to split. The intense pressure is overwhelming, making it difficult even to lift their heads. The voice announces the beginning of the admission ceremony for Class 20,557 of the Syndicate Academy. When they finally look up at the sky, they see a massive eye hovering above them. Shortly after, we see Gamina, who appears to be enchanted after hearing the director's speech. But our group seems a little uncertain about the whole situation. That's when Van drops a bombshell by asking if that giant eye was really the director. His out-of-place comment surprises everyone, and they quickly start bombarding him with questions about how he managed to see that eye and look up. Curious glances fill the room, especially from Dakan, who doesn't stop staring at him with his deep black eyes. It's downright terrifying. Vage twists the story, saying it felt like a giant eye was watching them anyway. Elmina explains that the being they saw was indeed the director, and that they will probably not see him again unless a student accomplishes something special or causes an incident. She is confident that Van will get a private meeting with the director, but Van jokes that meeting such a terrifying director is the last thing he wants to do before dying. Gamina adds that their success is also her success as a teacher, encouraging them to work hard. This catches Light by surprise, and he quickly asks Professor Elmina if she will be responsible for them. Gamina puts her teacup aside and confirms with a smile, officially introducing herself. She teaches magical combat and has been assigned as the teacher for Class 11. "I hope we can work well together for the next 5 years," she says. To Light, this feels strange because, as far as he knows, special admission students of lower levels are usually assigned to associate professors. Gamina confirms this, explaining that everyone present is so special this time that the responsibility was assigned to her. She decides to give them advice about the jealousy and hostility from regular students. Her words carry weight. Van can't help but think that the jealousy and hostility mentioned aren't just about academic competition, but also physical confrontations and fights between students. Matters beyond internal competition, protected by school rules, are things that even teachers cannot interfere in. Elmina then says that from now on, the four of them must stick together, since they are all rare special admission students. They will also form a group to climb the tower together until graduation. With that, Elmina ends the session and snaps her fingers to reveal a small gift reserved for them. She promises to explain the rules and details when they receive the artifact. At this moment, she shows a pendant that she declares to be the student badge. She reminds them that they can use it to identify themselves, access all campus facilities, and even teleport anywhere in the Union Kingdom. Later, when the trio uses their pendants, they are teleported outside the academy building, but soon return, letting out a frustrated scream. It's unclear why they are disappointed, but it seems the pendant forced them to teleport back since they are not yet allowed to leave. In any case, Light mentions that they will need to carry their student badges if they want to enter the tower. But then the cat girl asks why Van was left alone. Light responds that he has no idea, but the girl with black eyes suggests that maybe the director also felt Van's presence. She suspects that, among all the students, he was the only one capable of looking directly at the director. There's a possibility that the director also sensed his presence. The scene shifts to a later moment when Elmina is talking on the phone. She tells the person on the other end of the line that they were about to hold a tea party, but it seems they will have to cancel it because the director wants to meet Van. Shortly after, we see Van's terrified and anxious face, literally sweating cold just thinking about having a private meeting with the director on the first day, even without causing any trouble. The director orders him to face him directly, as his true form is not there. Van discovers that the director speaks through a doll. The director asks him to call him Master, and decides to explain why he summoned the boy for a meeting. Normally, the Master tries not to interfere in the growth of students. If they are weak, he leaves them as they are. If they are strong, he lets them remain strong. He also says that he doesn't care if any of his students die in the tower or survive to achieve glory someday. Then he reveals that he pursues only one goal, witnessing with his own eyes someone reaching the end of the tower. In a severe tone, the Master makes it clear that, to him, everything is irrelevant except seeing someone reach the top of the tower. He remains silent for a second after hearing all of that, and then questions what he understands by absurd. Banton also remembers his grandfather's words, and understands that the tower has existed since the time of his ancestors, and that the Banda family is determined to reclaim it. Furthermore, the protagonist knows he is ready to achieve all the glory and strength, even if it requires sacrifices, such as his own life. He remains determined to conquer the tower, but wonders why the professor and other students pursue the end of the tower. Then he questions this mysterious man. Why does he come from other dimensions to climb the tower? And what is the tower really? The Master reflects carefully on his answer and reveals that the tower is a door to the divine, a challenge. Van remains confused, but his master assures him that he has no reason to interfere with the student's arduous work, though he is considering making an exception this time by helping the boy. Of course, Van does not understand what the master means. The master points the doll's hand at the protagonist and says he has great potential. Observing his abilities, the director decides to make some efforts to help the boy prepare for his journey to the tower. Van wonders what kind of preparation he means. The main actions that grant the protagonist exploration privileges have been increased, and now he can travel to any dungeon with ease. The master advises him to first improve his skills before beginning his journey to climb the tower. Van is surprised to learn that he can leave the academy, and the master confirms this once again. When the director concludes this explanation, he helps the boy teleport back. Before letting him leave, the master advises him to continue improving his skills and promises to unlock his next privilege soon, provided he shows significant progress. The next privilege will be solo exploration of the tower. The master hopes they can meet again and teleports Van elsewhere. Our boy ends up being transferred to Professor Illuma's room, who asks him about the encounter. Van finds his head resting on her lap and is surprised to see her again. He quickly gets up, embarrassed, and Illuma comments that the master's personality is very strange and that he never likes visits. Upon observing Van's pendant, she is surprised to discover that he has been granted permission to leave the academy as a student. Van doesn't know if this is so important, but remembers that the master advised him to improve his skills quickly. She tells the boy that it is, in fact, very significant, and helps him understand that now he can freely explore the dungeons around the tower and also has the freedom to visit external cities at will. Van still can't believe that a student can have so many privileges, and Illuma explains that with this freedom, he can gain a lot of experience and prepare better than others. Van understands and feels relieved that the master didn't tell him he needed to become stronger, as he feels completely weak and powerless. He smiles awkwardly. Professor Yumina calls him lucky for the privileges he has gained and shares that it is difficult for professors to leave the academy at this time, since it is the Union's academy. Yumina reveals that within the academy, everything favors only the students, which can be inconvenient for the professors. Our boy understands, and she helps him realize that with the new privileges, he can easily explore dungeons and visit new cities whenever he is free. Yumina shows a certain envy and says she wishes she could take advantage of these opportunities too. The professor recommends that Van visit an external city known as Raqqa and says that it is a magnificent spring temple worth visiting. Van is confused by the sudden change in the professor's behavior. Before leaving, he asks if there is anything he wants from the city. After some time, the protagonist begins walking toward the new city. The weather seems incredible, and he remembers Professor Yumina's request. She had informed him about the famous and surprising honey wine produced by the temple priests, assigning the protagonist the mission to bring back at least 2 bottles of the beverage. Van still can't believe that his professor asked the students to run errands to get alcohol. Our boy decides to ignore this and thinks he should be grateful for receiving an inventory before departing. Suddenly, he notices an object and remembers it's something he received from his grandfather when he was still at home, just before entering the academy. It was a mysterious bag full of unknown objects. Before Van left home, his grandfather asked if he was ready to depart. Our boy assured him he was, and asked if his grandfather had slept well. The grandfather ignored the question and suddenly showed him the bag. He asked Van to open it and take whatever he wanted. At first, our young man was confused, but when he opened the mysterious bag, he found pure gold inside. Van was hesitant, but his grandfather confirmed that he could take everything he wanted. With a smile on his face, Van's grandfather said that all the treasure they had belonged to their ancestors, who had dedicated their lives to seeking the Tower of Babel. He confirmed once again that Van could keep everything and advised his grandson to use it wisely. The protagonist was very grateful to his grandfather and began to cry with emotion. Van didn't know how he would carry so many things without troubling his grandfather. This had been his concern before, but now he has the authority over an inventory. The protagonist smiles and considers it super useful. He is able to place all the objects in the inventory without any problems, and remembering that his grandfather taught him gold is a valuable object anywhere in the world, he decides to take a few pieces of gold. When he finishes preparing, he finally arrives at the city of Veronica and is thrilled to take his first step in the new world. Upon entering the enormous city, the protagonist discovers that, despite being in a completely different dimension, the urban landscape is very similar. He realizes his assumption was wrong as soon as he sees several flying vehicles everywhere. He wonders how they work, and suddenly someone calls him from behind. Some guards approach when they notice they have never seen him in the city before. As they get closer, the guards notice that our boy is part of the Union Academy, which surprises them. They formally greet the protagonist and introduce themselves as the guards responsible for the city's western limit. Van also introduces himself, and they ask how he managed to travel freely to Roanoke. They assume our boy received some kind of permission from the chancellor. He confirms they are right and that he has authorization to explore freely. The guards express their gratitude for the hard work the chancellor of the academy does to keep the city in peace. Van clumsily discovers that his academy is very influential. Since he is a first-year student, the guards assume he doesn't know much about Roanoke City and how everything works, so they offer to help him learn more. The guards say they will provide all the necessary guidance as it is part of their job, and if he doesn't understand something, he is free to ask. The protagonist decides to accept the offer and points to a vehicle. Van says he wants to get one of those bikes and asks how much it costs to own one. With the help of the city guards of Taranaka, Van manages to get an MB, and Taranaka Van gets an overb and begins to pilot it to return to the academy. The overb makes our boy feel incredible as it soars into the sky. He remembers that earlier he asked the guards for help to buy one. The city guards were a bit confused and informed Van that even the standard model of an overb, which costs around 250,000 ronya, could be very expensive for a student like him. Van is surprised to discover that it is known as overvik and doesn't understand how currency works in this new world. Our boy decides to trade it for a gold bar, unaware of its great value. The guards end up surprised and wonder how the protagonist managed to get such a large gold bar. Van reveals it was given to him by his grandfather, but they don't believe the gold bar is real. Van discovers that a single gold bar is worth 70,500,000 R and considers himself lucky to have received something so valuable from his grandfather. He thinks about thanking the old man, and as he returns to the academy, our boy notices his pet snake and Ev. He asks for its opinion and shares that he infused the overb with the attributes of Oij, turning it into a living artifact similar to Ava. The protagonist decides to name the overb Lilita and hopes his two living artifacts get along. Ev understands. While driving around the Tower of Babel, our boy thinks his journey was worth it since he managed to buy liquor for his Professor Illumina and even found a sibling for his pet artifact, Ev. After completing all his tasks, the protagonist smiles and decides to return to the academy. After handing the liquor to the professor, our boy finally reunites with his friends, but starts feeling extremely sick. A light gives him a glass of water and expresses her disappointment with Van. His friend can't believe the protagonist came back hungover after leaving his friends without saying a word to attend some random meeting. Van apologizes and tries to justify himself by saying the professor didn't let him leave, and that in the end, they both ended up drinking together. Doko observes an emblem with a flower on the protagonist's uniform and asks if this is a sign that he will represent the group in exchange for sharing drinks with Professor Illumina. Van feels confused, but thinks it makes sense while chewing his food. A light realizes she has no other choice but to follow the decision, as it was made by Professor Illumina, who is in charge of them. Doko shares her opinion, saying that she is the only one worthy of representing the group, which scandalizes both A and Van. She explains that it's because she is the strongest of the four. Doko asks Van for his opinion, but A Light intervenes and clarifies that all four are equal. He thinks she said that in a strange way and decides to clear up the misunderstandings about what she just said. Doko says that her attitude and arrogance will be terrible for future ascents of the tower and that he doesn't believe she is the strongest of the group. Doko smiles, finding it amusing to hear something about companion equality from someone who asked Professor Yomina if it was possible to climb the tower alone. She becomes embarrassed and tries to justify herself. Van and Ruchel remember that she really did ask the professor that question, and a light timidly tells them both that she asked out of curiosity and assures them that she wants to be part of a team with all of them. Van starts to feel discouraged and realizes that animosity is increasing before their morning class. Now he understands that he should have planned everything in advance. Van knows that his group will experience a difficult start. Even though he has no particular reason to lead the group or become president, our boy now understands that the reason his professor chose him among everyone is that while this A-Light is unconscious most of the time, she has a strong sense of pride. Doko, despite being incredibly strong, is destined to make many enemies due to his selfish attitude. Rukul has a passive attitude but lacks the personality to lead the group. Van sighs as he discovers the true personalities of the special admission students. Our boy tells the entire group to calm down and listen to him first. Van opines that, in his view, the leader doesn't need to be the strongest of the four and says that it's better for it to be one of the weakest. Doko doesn't understand what he's trying to say. Van explains that if the class president is the strongest person, they will often make decisions on their own, and someone who has the responsibility of uniting the class shouldn't do that. The group members listen, and the protagonist says the group leader should be someone capable of offering good solutions for everyone, and that it's also important to be at the center of the group. Van says that he has the most outgoing personality, and therefore, in his opinion, is the only one worthy of being the class president. Doko doesn't agree with him, but since Van was already chosen by the professor to be the president, she decides to follow his reasoning for now and lets him be. Our boy thanks her for her understanding and feels relieved. Doko tries to be honest and with a cold expression tells everyone that she only wishes to guide the protagonist. Our boy doesn't understand what she is trying to say. Dako says that there are some things she disagrees with, but since she wants to get what she desires, she's willing to accept even someone as unnecessary as her classmates 8 and Ruchel. They are a little surprised to hear this. Dako hopes they can meet again and leaves. Our boy anxiously tries to calm his roommate and feels a little disappointed after experiencing a morning like this on his first day. At Van College, he feels tired and wonders why a simple morning of classes feels like a battlefield. The protagonist decides to take a break for himself and realizes it will take time to resolve the pride issues among the group members. Hu asks Van something, questioning whether C still has the serpent he showed before, and says that at least he wants to touch it once. Van realizes that the academy is full of multiple challenges, and in his first lesson as class president, he represents everyone in a room full of many unique individuals. Our boy faces a new difficulty when one of the students challenges him to a fight to check if the remaining students are skilled in the training field. Van is with his group, the special students. The teacher decides to start the first class with a bit of light sparring and asks for the students' opinions. The special students from Class 11 begin acting like madmen and demand a sparring session against the common students, among whom is the protagonist. Everyone is out of their minds and can't believe that the teacher has chosen our boy as the class representative. The special students try to challenge Van. Seeing them agitated, our protagonist feels uncomfortable. A C. White discovers that the Union Academy assigns students to different classes based on their abilities and capacities. He realizes that the special class students already seem to hate Class 11 for some reason. Van anxiously shares that it's likely because he carries the flower emblem, which is provoking all of them. Erecto, a muscular student, notices the flower emblem that our protagonist received from Professor Elman and feels insulted by it. The hot-headed student grinds his teeth in rage upon seeing Van displaying the emblem and decides never to acknowledge the protagonist. Erecto starts shouting and demands a fight against Van, asks the teacher, and easily gets permission. The teacher calls our protagonist to step up because he will face Erecto in combat. Professor Yumina observed her students from the office and was surprised to see what was happening. It seemed ridiculous to her that her students had a joint session with the Academy's special class on the first day. To make matters worse, the first period was brutal. Comprehensive practical combat discipline. Special admission students from lower dimensions cannot face beings from higher dimensions. Someone up there must have planned the curriculum with this cruel joke in mind. Professor Yumina could sense malice in this arrangement. The assistant teacher in charge of the class seemed a little too energetic when calling out Van Guan's name to step into the arena and fight Eric. The young man must have also felt something suspicious about the whole situation. He raised his hand, worried about his well-being. As his combat skills were still lacking, he wouldn't gain anything from the fight except injuries. In response, the assistant teacher deducted 3 points from his total score. The bald bastard didn't accept his concern as a valid excuse not to face Eric. It seemed that the instructor just wanted to humiliate him in front of everyone. Van continued defending his right to withdraw, claiming that he was accepted as a special admission student due to his unique capability and not for his combat skills. He argued that it would make more sense to assess his abilities through another method rather than forcing him to fight. The bald monster couldn't take it anymore, a mere student giving him verbal lessons. Enraged and frustrated, the teacher deducted 5 more points from his total score. There was no other choice left. Surprisingly, Van proposed a counteroffer. He accepted the combat but insisted on using the rest of the week to prepare for the fight, which would take place in 7 days. Van firmly believes that if he can get a week to prepare and reach full form, he will wipe the floor with Eric, who was one of the students from a higher dimension. His bold proclamation cast an unsettling silence over the entire area. At first, the students of Class 1 refused to believe the outrageous proposal they had just heard. The audacity of a lower-dimensional creature speaking up when it was obvious that his skill was lacking was absurd. There was one student who seemed especially interested in Van's daring proclamation. The boy was practically making an enemy of the entire special class by himself. Bowdy trembled with frustration as the lower-dimensional student continued ignoring his orders, even adjusting At a time of his choosing, the band did not respect the belligerent alien at all. This guy wasn't even a tenured professor. In the end, his strike was successful, and he managed to gain a week of preparation time for a fight with Reese. The news about the official match between students from the special class and Class 11 next Tuesday spread quickly like wildfire. The entire academy would be able to watch it live. Baldy was practically saying he didn't want humiliation. Norm wanted to turn the destruction of the band into a grand spectacle. The bald monster ominously warned Van to give it his all, to show his skills, or else Van wouldn't care about a glance. He looked beyond the bald man and waved a hand in greeting toward Erecto. Van smiled confidently and expressed his excitement for the fight. Erecto wasn't much of a talker. Van just wanted to confirm something through their brief interaction. He managed to take a look at Erecto's stats, which were terrifying. Thanks to his infinite reading eyes, his vision allowed a deeper understanding of the aura and spirit of his target. As expected from a special class student, Erecto was a beast. His life and body stats were simply outrageous. Even so, Van didn't feel too bothered. He had grown used to seeing his classmates' stats, and compared to them, Erecto and he were nothing. Van had much to improve to climb the tower with his comrades from lower dimensions. As he left the stage, Van felt confused by the somber looks on the faces of Light and Russo. His eyes focused on Dak, who was doing some warm-ups. Unlike the president of her class, Dak specialized in combat and wasn't afraid to cause some damage. She mocked the arrogant bastards, daring them to face her, and was curious about the abilities of a special admissions student. Dak had truly built herself differently. She was probably the strongest person any of the bands had ever seen. She scanned the group with her ID, showing level traits in every aspect. Dak left her taunt, and none of the special class students stepped forward. They stood in silence, obviously afraid to face someone who looked so strong. Even the associate professor felt the weight of the challenge. Everything was more or less as Van expected. His infinite reading eyes couldn't fully grasp the extent of Dak's power. There was no way the students from Class 1 could ignore her suffocating aura. Dak incited the innate pride of the students, who should have courage and show confidence. She pointed at Erecto in the middle of the crowd, and the stone-bodied brute began sweating nervously. Seeing that Erecto wasn't someone who could hold his own, his class president Vaco hoped to receive the same treatment to crush Erecto's inflated ego. Poor Erecto. He just wanted to do a little bullying and didn't expect a challenge from a god of death. If he tried to save face and back down from Dak's provocations, Erecto would be finished. He would lose face, be struck down, and injured to the point he couldn't recover in a week. That outcome didn't work for Van, so he rushed into the arena to draw attention away from Erecto. That week, Van knew Dak was only trying to fight against the unfair treatment they had been suffering. He was determined to prove his worth with his own abilities. From now on, they couldn't rely on Dak's brute strength all the time. After all, the mysterious Rio thought Van was someone who relied on tricks, but maybe he had a bit of courage. Thus, instead of Erecto, Dak wanted another challenger to face Van. In the square, she continued asking the silent crowd if anyone wanted to step forward, but no one responded. Seeing that she couldn't get a decent sparring partner, things became problematic. Dak sighed in defeat and turned, calling out the special class. It was all bark and no bite. Now that a real threat had appeared, all they could do was crawl on the ground. Her companions smiled awkwardly in the face of her savage taunts. The dogs of the special class gritted their teeth and trembled with frustration at their own incompetence. That was until a special student, who hated being called a dog, intervened. A broad-shouldered man with slicked-back blonde hair, horns, and a golden aura stood out among the crowd. He declared that the weak and foolish are the dogs who gather in packs, growling and pretending to protect his little groups. For him, this was fun. Both Dako and Van could feel that Blonde was no joke. If they looked closer, they would notice that even among the crowded special class, he seemed to be on another level. Light recognized the individual as Emma, the ruler of the Edius dimension. Van had no idea what those words meant. Fortunately, Light explained that, excluding the Syndicate, there are 10 dimensions with the highest hierarchies. Order here comes from a family that governs one of those superior dimensions. Emma is practically a representative of the strength of the new generation of the 10 main families. Silence, once again, filled the stadium. This time, no one could take their eyes off the confrontation. Emma asked the professor to bring something, and the bald, personality-less bastard nervously paced back and forth. In the end, he managed to bring a recording device to film the fight. In this world, everything is shared on the intranet, which is basically the internet of the previous world. The crowd eagerly opened their smartphones. In short, companies and educational institutions created a network for exchanging information. As someone who came from a lower dimension, Van couldn't believe that superior beings used something similar to the internet. It didn't take long for Van to find the channel broadcasting the imminent combat live. The live stream had sharp and fluid quality. From the overhead angle, it was evident that the associate professor was determined to humiliate the special admission students before the largest audience possible. With Dako on the ground, it was unlikely that Baldy would get what he wanted. Standing face to face, two students of great talent examined each other. Their auras clashed. Emma fully trusted his abilities, while Dako saw his opponent as a complete novice. He didn't take a stance and granted the first move for free, as a disadvantage. As a proud heir of the Dimensional Empire, Emma hated being called a